Hello, Kristin Knutson, Production Manager and Technical Director at the College Light Opera Company, coming to you from the costume shop at the West Falmouth Inn. Behind the Scenes with Kristin Knutson is made possible by a generous gift from Clyde Tyndale and Deb Winograd. Last week, I shared a brief history and evolution of the Highfield Theater, and today I would like to take you on a similar journey exploring Clock's campus here at the Old West Falmouth Inn. The College Light Opera Company has occupied the West Falmouth Inn since 1975. This nearly 6-acre campus is the heart of the organization. It's where company members and staff work, rehearse, eat, sleep, and socialize around the clock, pun absolutely intended. Although it's usually a busy working and living space, the inn feels like a museum for past clock productions. The halls are lined with posters and photographs. Remnants of the inn's former life are scattered throughout the building, and as we tour the grounds and the main building's interior, I will highlight some of these points of interest. Last week, I took you on a tour around the Highfield Theater, and I mentioned that in its early days, Clock used the nearby Tanglewood mansion and its barn to house students and rehearse shows. Tanglewood itself contained dormitory rooms upstairs and a kitchen and dining room downstairs, which doubled as the costume shop. The costume crew had to clear away sewing machines and cutting projects for every meal, and even then the dining room space was too tight to accommodate the entire company at once. The barn's first floor was the primary rehearsal space, with a footprint that conveniently matched the Highfield stage. Rows of stalls were converted into bedrooms with bunk beds, and the loft area of the barn was also turned into housing. In 1974, when it became known that Tanglewood was destined for demolition and Clock would need new housing and rehearsal facilities, Mr. and Mrs. Josiah K. Lilly III offered the use of a recently acquired property 4 miles from the theater, the Old West Falmouth Inn, for a rental price of only $1 a year. The inn and surrounding cottages would provide enough housing for Clock's staff and students, much-needed work and storage space for the costume crew, and room for rehearsal within the inn's old living room. Long before its life as an inn and restaurant, this property was a summer residence built by Sarah Scull after the 1884 death of her husband, Edward Lawrence Scull. The mansion was completed in 1895 and dubbed Bridgefields Hall, so named for its proximity to both the bridge to Chappaquiddick and the fields that stretch toward West Falmouth. The building was designed by Boston architect J. Williams Beale, who had just opened his own architecture firm after working in New York and spending some time abroad. I would like to share a direct quote from a 1978 description published in The Enterprise. The house is an example of Queen Anne architecture of the 19th century, modified by the Japanese influence that also affected other aspects of this early modern style. The mandatory living hall, with its fine staircase and picturesque fireplace, constructed of West Falmouth granite, is typical of Queen Anne. The informality of the house, the interrelationships of indoor and outdoor areas, the strong horizontal lines, and the appropriateness of the structure to the site are all qualities also to be found in the then blossoming architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright and his colleagues. The building's half-timbered Tudor Revival style is unusual for the area and time period, when wood-shingled homes were far more common. The slate roof you see today is striking, but not original to the structure. Based in Philadelphia, Mrs. Scull and her 2 children summered at Bridgefields Hall until her death around 1910. The house was sold to Catherine A. Montgomery, who then turned the property into the West Falmouth Inn in 1912. The inn changed hands several times. In 1948, it was sold to Mr. and Mrs. Roger S. Phillips, who operated the inn until 1966, when a corporation tied to Mrs. Lilly purchased the property. Hilda Coppage, well-known local restaurateur and former manager of the Papanesset Inn, bought the inn around 1970 and resumed operations. She ultimately sold the inn back to the Lillys, who then offered use of the facilities to Clock in 1974. The Lillys made some improvements to the site prior to Clock's tenancy, removing an old swimming pool, and adding structural reinforcements to the 1895 structure to ensure safety. The building was never engineered to support the weight of the slate roof, so the Lilies had large wooden beams installed with vertical steel rod ties, providing trussing to relieve stress on the old primary framing. Just prior to the 1975 season, founder and then producer and general manager Bob Haslam and his wife Ursula held their wedding reception here at the inn. The day immediately after, the stage and costume crews arrived and helped staff move equipment and furniture from Tanglewood to the inn and started setting up the cottages as dormitories. Despite the added complication of travel between Highfield and the inn for meals and performances, the inn proved to be ideal for Clock's operations. Thanks to its former life as a vacation destination, restaurant, and bar, the inn was already equipped with a large industrial kitchen and dining room, perfectly suited for feeding a small army of performers and technicians. The inn's former cocktail lounge, the Pony Room, was converted into a dedicated costume shop, conveniently close to rehearsal and the kitchen for meals. The inn's expansive attic became the new costume storage space, a vast improvement over the damp basement of Tanglewood. Unfortunately, the Lilies' generous dollar rental offer was not indefinite. Clock's continued tenancy depended entirely upon the Lilies' own desires for the property. Even though the building had been shored up a few years ago, the structure was showing its age, and the Lilies were becoming increasingly concerned about its continued viability. They felt that the property might be better served by removing all of the structures and becoming a public park. Clock received word that 1978 would be the company's final summer of residency at the inn. College Light Opera Company had neither the time nor the funding to immediately secure alternative housing, so the 1978 season was launched under the shadow of a very uncertain future. Clock would have to look for a new home while simultaneously operating a full season. The housing crisis was kept quiet while the Haslams and the board conducted an initial search for alternative spaces within reasonable distance. Mr. Lilly did offer to sell a property on Old Palmer Avenue with some existing barns, but the cost of converting those structures to rehearsal and living space would have been too high. The only other space briefly considered was an old hotel called Sonny's, just down the hill from the theater. The proximity to Highfield was desirable, but the building was in such poor shape that Clock could not have afforded to make the property habitable. At this point, Tanglewood had already been demolished, so there was no option of returning to Clock's original facilities. Facing grim prospects, Haslam decided to take Clock's crisis public and started an emergency fundraising campaign. Despite a highly successful 1978 season, fundraising efforts produced only a trickle of donations. At nearly the midpoint of the summer season, only an eighth of the fundraising goal had been achieved. The final show closed without a new home on the horizon. The Lilies gave Clock permission to store some equipment in the main building over the winter, while demolition was slated to begin on the cottages. In a last-moment effort to secure Clock's home base, board chairman Bill Cooper proposed that Clock offer to buy the West Falmouth Inn property from the Lilies, offering to purchase the campus for the cost of the planned demolition. The Lilies accepted the offer. Clock was able to acquire a mortgage, and by the beginning of the 1979 season, had raised enough money to nearly pay off the entire purchase amount. The inn was officially Clock property, and the company's future in Falmouth had been secured. Rehearsal is held in the old living room, which is just barely large enough to represent the Highfield stage. You can see the ground plan of the stage taped out on the floor.
We sail the ocean blue, and our saucy ships of beauty. We're sober men and true.
Directors often have to sit on the steps of the grand staircase to lead rehearsals.
We stand to our guns all day. When at anchor we ride on the Portsmouth tide. We've plenty of time for play. Ahoy, ahoy, the boys are free. Ahoy, ahoy, on the sea we stand to our guns all day.
This room includes an enormous fireplace built with locally sourced granite. Its chimney is prominently featured on the front exterior of the building. At the far west end of the building, beside the rehearsal space, this area was once an open porch beneath a deep overhang. It was enclosed long before Clock had possession of the building and served as a bar with service windows that opened up to the wraparound deck. These days, it's a bicycle stable and an overflow hangout space for students during rehearsal. At the moment, it's a holding area for all the patio furniture that is normally set out in the summer. Eventually, with the completion of our new rehearsal building, this will be restored to an exterior space, and the living room will become a social hub instead of a rehearsal hall. The Falmouth Theatre Guild makes use of the Highfield Theatre when Clock is not in operation, so we winter the majority of our equipment here at the inn. Under normal circumstances, the summer begins by transporting gear back to the theater and preparing the space for rehearsals. The dining room was once the inn's restaurant and today serves as a busy cafeteria for company members. Portions of the dining room are currently enclosed to serve as office space for business staff. The new building will include dedicated offices, so these partitions will be removed this summer to open the dining room back up to full capacity. Currently, with no students on site and several maintenance projects underway, the dining room is serving as temporary storage. We happen to have an artifact from the dining room's restaurant history, an old dinner menu in very good condition. There is no printed date, so we can't be completely certain of the year, but take a look at those prices. As mentioned before, the costume shop is housed in a lower rear corner of the building that formerly served as a cocktail lounge called the Pony Room. Signs for the Pony Room still hang on the walls, and the double doors into the space feature carved handles resembling horses. The Pony Room featured a bar with a small window into the main dining room. Although the bar itself was removed long ago, the wood paneling remains, and you can see evidence of the bar's demolition on the walls. The costume shop is currently undergoing a full reorganization and cleaning. Every costume crew has done a degree of reorganizing each year, but the shop has reached a point where decluttering is necessary. Until recently, the old bar wall held some shelving for hair and makeup equipment, and racks along this far wall held dozens of baskets of scrap fabric. We hope to enclose this region to make a dust-free fabric dyeing area, and the fabric storage will be transitioned into a large closet that currently serves as the music library. Take a look at these treasures from the inn days. This brochure, with no printed date, gives us a glimpse into the red-carpeted world of the Pony Room Lounge and shows us how the living room was previously furnished. We also have an old matchbook from the Pony Room that features the embossed image of a horse on one side. Costume storage is in the attic and roughly organized by time period. Our collection is extensive, and some pieces have been repurposed for decades. Very little space remains for new costumes, so this summer we are sorting and reducing our stock to eliminate the very worn and less useful pieces. Depending on the state of the COVID-19 crisis by the end of the summer, we hope to hold a socially distanced costume sale in early fall. Any textiles that cannot be sold will be donated or recycled. The other wing of the attic houses clock-owned prop furniture too large to store at the Highfield. The inn also provides housing on its second floor. Some of the original open verandas were enclosed to create more interior space, so these bedrooms are often charmingly eccentric in layout, and many include a bathroom attached to the suite. This enormous room at the eastern end of the building is affectionately referred to as the orphanage, and houses 8 beds. The transition to the old veranda is obvious here, where glassless windows and empty door frames have been left in place. There are still many access points to open or screened porches. This space overlooks the yard where staff maintain a summer garden. Surrounding the inn are 4 outbuildings, numbered counterclockwise from the inn itself and referred to as cottages 1, 2, 3, and 4. Cottages 1 and 2 are situated a stone's throw from Chappaquoit Harbor, built in the mid-1930s during the original West Falmouth Inn days. In relatively recent years, cottages 1 and 2 were elevated onto raised foundations to protect them from flooding. Cottages 3 and 4 were added in the early 1960s, with the smaller cottage 3 originally serving as a caretaker's residence. Today, these cottages provide housing for Clock's summer company, with some rooms accommodating several students. You may have noticed a bright green body of water on the satellite image of our campus. This is indeed on our property, a man-made retention pond created in 1968. You can clearly see the recently built Cottage 4 in both of these images of the excavation. The pond is a bit difficult to view due to heavy foliage surrounding its banks, but if you're lucky, you might catch a glimpse of the white egrets nesting in the secluded area. The inn's front door entrance features a style of glass similar to crown glass or bullseye glass, handmade using a glass-blowing technique in which blown globes are spun until the hot glass flattens into a disc large enough for window panes. The process leaves a round, raised mark at the rotation point. This example has a very pronounced cup at the center, so it is possible it's an imitation, but I suspect it was made in a similar fashion. Another fascinating feature you can't miss. This faceted outcropping, which serves as the inn's main office, is referred to as the octagon. We know from older photos that this structure was not originally connected to the house, but was eventually joined by a small vestibule with an office door. Rumor has been passed down through Clock generations that the octagon was built as a playhouse for the 2 Skull children. Its low stature and small windows are a strong indication that may be true. As we complete our exploration, please enjoy a few peaceful moments of the natural sounds of Clock. Now I'd like to give you a look at progress on construction of the John R. Lucas Rehearsal Hall. This campus has seen quite the transformation over the past year, including a complete overhaul of the septic system for the entire campus. The process has been meticulously documented in photographs by Clock Board member Clyde Tyndale. It's a lot to take in. At the moment, the most exciting activity on site has been centered around the foundation and concrete slab for the rehearsal hall. So for today, I'd like to show you some plans and elevations for the building, then get you up to speed on construction of the foundation. I'll talk about all the other ongoing campus construction in future episodes, and I'll be updating you each week on any milestones we reach. Clock's West Falmouth campus operates at full capacity. It provides space for living, dining, main rehearsals, student practice, the costume shop, and administrative work. In addition to activities, it's the only place to store much of the costumes, scenery, props, production equipment, and building maintenance equipment. Every available space on campus is in continual use, making the logistics of daily life and work complicated. This intensive use of the property is unsustainable and poses significant challenges for the company. Additionally, the company has outdated technology and equipment for production use at Highfield Theater, which is important for delivering high-quality education and stage productions. The College Light Opera Company broke ground for the new John R. Lucas Rehearsal Hall in August of 2019 after a year-long capital campaign. In addition to the planned state-of-the-art rehearsal facility, the campus is undergoing a series of much-needed upgrades. A campus-wide nitrogen-reducing septic system was recently completed during the ongoing foundation work for the hall. Most of the existing buildings will see some improvements as well. The inn's original veranda on the west side will be restored, and cottages 3 and 4 will gain extra sleeping space and a garage. The 9,000 square foot rehearsal barn will be a dedicated multi-use space for rehearsals, smaller performances, and offices. Designed to complement its surroundings, the barn-like structure will be a tastefully appointed, single-level, state-of-the-art facility. Features include a 3,000 square foot main hall offering superior acoustics for concerts and a mirrored wall and high ceilings for dance lessons. It will allow for flexible configurations to accommodate a variety of seating styles. 2 soundproofed practice rooms. Appropriate climate-controlled storage spaces for instruments, music library, and archives. A catering alcove appropriate for a small bar and concession area. An indoor green room. An outdoor green room and porch. 3 private offices and a large administrative office suite. ADA-compliant access throughout, and green features where possible. For brevity's sake, today I will only be sharing images pertaining to the rehearsal hall foundation work over the past year. Please keep in mind that this does not properly reflect the extensive septic, plumbing, water retention, and electrical work that has happened concurrently with concrete forming. I will be touching on those other details of campus improvements in future episodes of Behind the Scenes. The majority of these photos are provided by Clyde Tyndale and are presented in chronological order. Here you can see the clearing of vegetation and topsoil, as well as markings denoting placement of both the foundation and the sewer system, which will be buried beneath the lawn. Here you can see progress on excavation, carving out paths for the footing of the building. You can see remnants of old drainage pipes poking out of the dirt. A bed of gravel has been laid in the zones where concrete work is expected. Here the concrete forms are taking shape, assembled with wood boards that can be pried away after the concrete has set. You can get a sense for the size and shape of the building's footprint now. Steel rebar has been prepped within the areas bounded by wood forms. Finally, it's time for the first pass of concrete. With the footing set in place, the workers build up a cage-like rebar structure that will reinforce the full foundation walls. The rebar caging is enclosed by taller concrete form boards. Concrete pouring again, this time to the full height of the planned foundation, determining the level of the eventual concrete slab. The interior of the foundation concrete is lined with insulating foam before the cavity is filled with packed dirt. Here you see the formation of a concrete ramp. Now it's utilities time. Channels are cleared in the packed dirt to lay pipe and conduit for plumbing and electrical wiring, which will be buried before the next round of concrete work. Similar to the first step, now the interior concrete footings that do not require the full depth of the foundation are prepared for concrete. This past week, workers have laid an even layer of gravel in the areas where a full concrete slab will be poured. The gravel has been covered by foam insulation panels, then a plastic membrane over the entire surface. For a few days, all hands have been preparing and placing a steel rebar grid over the area. I believe the next step will be pouring the concrete slab for the structure's floor. We'll have to see next week just how far they get. Thanks for joining me today. Behind the Scenes with Kristin Knutson is part of our larger series, Digital Clock. Digital Clock is made possible by a generous gift from Phil and Liz Gross. If you'd like to learn more about our programming or how you can become a supporter, please visit us at collegelightoperacompany.com. Join me this time next week for another installment of Behind the Scenes, when I will be discussing elements of stagecraft and demonstrating construction of some essential components of theatrical scenery. So get out your scrap lumber and all those tools rusting away in your garage. See you next week.